Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I've come to this scene through the design industry. I was an industrial designer, and I needed to sell my work, and I had to bring my products to trade shows that I felt were not really very compelling for well-designed products, and began new trade shows. One of those shows is called the International Contemporary Furniture Fair, and it's around 30 years old now at the Javits Center in New York once a year, and that turned into an official design week. And I now serve on the steering committee for NYC by Design, New York City's official design initiative. And in doing so, I knew that our industry liked to talk amongst themselves. And we never really shared our ideas or challenges with others. And I thought that it was important to bring the public into that conversation. And I started a public face to NYC by Design, which is called Design Pavilion. And we show once a year in May during the design celebration in the city. And we've grown to 12 days in Times Square between 42nd Street and 49th Street. We take up all the pedestrian plazas, and we install interactive, multidisciplinary exhibits that tell design stories. And I found that in doing so, many of my exhibitors and my partners were artists, and they were artists working with technology. And we've always known that there's a thin line between product design and functional art and crafts and art and now technology. So I'm really thrilled to be here and meeting all of you. I'm also very proud to say that I'm on the board of advisors as of today, I think, or yesterday, for CODAworks. And I helped Tony initiate and start the CODA Awards, which has everything to do with design and art and the collaboration. So that's a little bit of background that she asked me to share with you. And I hope that one day I'll be working with a lot of you in Times Square. We have 4 million people walking through during that time period, and that's a lot of eyes to share your genius with. So I'd like to introduce you to Eric Rodenbeck, who is CEO of Stamen Design, an interdisciplinary design firm intersecting the worlds of art, technology, and design. His work lives in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and he is the recipient of the very prestigious and wonderful 2017 Smithsonian National Design Award for Interactive Design. And for me, Eric has transformed dull stats and data into incredibly gorgeous, exciting, and compelling works of art. So Eric, please show us more.
Great, thanks. Hello. Isn't this a good conference? Yes. It's been really good. I wasn't sure, and now I know. I'm Eric. I'm the CEO and the creative director of Stamen Design in San Francisco. I've been making maps and data visualizations as Stamen since 2001. And what I'm going to show you just really briefly here is a list of things that we can make maps of and the visualizations that flow from them. So, and a big part of our work is in the variety of things that you can map. So I'm just going to go quickly through them, and I think most of this is going to be about the conversation. But this is a map of the biome of an infant's gut. Inside your body are more cells that are not human than are human, and scientists are now starting to discover those and to make work based on them. And these are tools that we built for them to help them figure out what's inside your gut. And it's too much to explain right now, but they basically take all the DNA in your gut and they break it apart into bazillions of fragments and then put it back together and look at it this way. So there's a whole host of things happening here around They're starting to develop things that we're going to remediate nuclear waste and things like that. It's a very exciting field of study. And it's a very complex field of study. We were talking about the temple at Burning Man and how a geneticist was the best one to organize it all. If you're going to be a geneticist these days, you have to be really organized, and this is how you do your work. We also make maps of emotions. This is a project that we undertook to map what science knows about what's going on in your emotions. All of this is online. This is at atlasofemotions.com. We did it for these guys. So the man on the left is Paul Ekman, and the man in the middle is the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama asked Paul to make him an atlas of emotions, and he asked me. And I turned around and said, I have no idea what that even means, but let's get going. Because when you have design crits with the Dalai Lama, this is what happens. He brought those ears. We also make maps of the stock market. This is a map of the NASDAQ stock exchange. A lot of this is also online too, but just to give you a sense that you can do maps for the Dalai Lama, stock market, metagenomics. There are design principles that cut across all of those projects, and we're in the business of finding out what they are and giving it back. So this is a map of the opening 30 seconds of the NASDAQ stock exchange, and all those are little trades, and I can tell you more about those as we talk. We've also done maps of the United States. This is a map of the foreign-born population of the United States, centered right now on Contra Costa County. It's a map of the census of the United States, and every year you can go through and you can see the foreign-born population of the United States, which turns out to be substantial, and recent political bullshit notwithstanding, we are a nation of immigrants. We have been a nation of immigrants. This is how much a nation of immigrants we are. We also make maps of climate change. This is a map of sea level rise in New York City. There's a whole project behind this that involves the intersection of sea level rise with demographics. So you can do things like see under 4 or 5 feet of sea level rise. Are the wealthy people going to be worse off than the poor ones? Are the areas that flood going to have lots of people in them? Things like that. The idea is to bring a kind of rigor to the conversation around climate change, so that it's not just either it doesn't happen or it is happening, but it's more specific than that. So this is New York City, I believe under 4 feet of water. The interface lets you go up to, no, it's under 10 feet of water. At the time we thought 10 feet of water, that's never going to happen, and then Hurricane Sandy happened and the map looked basically like that, because the storm surge was 12 feet, I believe. We also make maps just to have fun. This is a map of the world rendered in watercolor. I got tired of making stuff that was looking too technical, and put together a project that lets you map the entire world as though it were drawn by a watercolor artist. I got to a place where I wanted to make something where you couldn't tell what part had been done by a human and what part had been done by a machine. So you can go to maps.stamen.com, type in any place in the world, and see what it would look like if somebody had painted it as a watercolor painting. And we would get a lot of comments on social media that would say things like, do you have an army of Chinese artists in your basement, like quickly drawing every time somebody does a search? But we don't. It's done digitally. We also make maps of cities. This is a map of Los Angeles. It's looking at the difference between the size of the plot that the building is built on and the size of the building that it's built on. So you can start to see the relationship between built size of the built environment and of the natural environment. And there's a whole map of LA behind here, and it's pretty amazing to see the difference between the kind of really dense bungalow districts and the places where there's much more spaciousness between the buildings, just in the forms of the texture. And then lastly, this is a project we put together for the Victoria and Albert Museum earlier this year. It's a map of a 5-kilometer long fiber optic cable that's buried about 2 feet under the ground at Stanford University. The thing about fiber optics is that when you send a signal through it, if you're very careful and you measure the differentiation between what you sent and what actually comes back, you can measure earthquakes, you can measure basically based on the vibration of the signal. And so you can do things like find washing machines, you can find cars. At the outer limits of this technology, we're starting to be able to tell the difference between a Volvo with 4 people in it and a Volvo with 3 people in it. So there's a whole communications infrastructure conversation that's going to start to get very urgent as time goes by. And I think the best way for us to engage with it is to make stuff about it. So that's what this is about. And I'm looking forward to talking with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So before we go on to Laura, Eric, your work is extremely functional and technical, but you do live in many museum collections. Do you consider yourself an artist?
I don't know. I don't know that it matters.
Do you want to use that?
Oh, yes, sorry.
That's okay. I don't know that it matters. I was thinking about this before, the Meow Wolf stuff that we saw. Is that art? Does it matter? I think those differentiations are not super important when an art form or a communications medium is at its infancy, as data visualization is. And we had a similar conversation about photography when photography was first starting to come online. Is it art? Is it documentation? Who's allowed to do it? What kind of art? Is photography? Ansel Adams was criticized for moving things around in his photographs because photography was supposed to be about this direct one-to-one relationship between the world and the film. And so, I mean, kind of, to the degree that it gets me paid and is useful, yes.
Okay.
Maybe that's the better way.
That's the answer. Thank you. So Laura Sydell fell in love with the intimate storytelling qualities of radio, which combined her passions for theater and writing with her addiction to the news. Laura is NPR's digital culture correspondent. She reports on the impact of technology on culture, society, and human behavior for NPR's major news magazines, Morning Edition, and All Things Considered, one of my favorite shows. And maybe you'll recognize her voice. I did. Laura?
It's great to be here, and this conference has actually been great and is giving me some ideas for my own work. So let's see, I think if I do that, yeah, that's me. So first I'm just going to talk before I'm going to show you a picture. I did a project that caught Tony's attention, and it was called Artists and Criminals, and the subtitle is What They Have to Tell Us About the Future of Technology. And it's something, I want to tell you how I even got this idea. How many people have read Neuromancer, William Gibson's Neuromancer? In it, he comes out in 1984, and in the book, he coins the term cyberspace. He imagines that the future of the internet will be a bunch of corporations fighting off hackers, and one of the main characters is harmed. He's a general who was harmed in a cyber war between the US and Russia. And this comes out in 1984, which is just remarkable. He had never even seen the internet. And I went to a talk of his, and he was asked, how does he get these ideas for what the future is going to look like? And he said, I never go to talks of tech gurus. He said, but give me a room full of artists and criminals playing with an emerging technology, and I'm good. I've made my lunch. And I thought about that, and I think artists often are prescient. And so I went out actually and looked for some prescient artists. This is work. He was one of the artists I profiled. This is it was his first piece. And what it is that is actually a robot it has a heartbeat that keeps going, and that clock is counting down to when it's going to die. And it sits in a gallery. And the point of this piece is that people would come in and they would kind of be horrified. Like, it's going to die, but why? Why would you feel that way about a robot? The stuff that I met him, he was doing these little guys. These are called Blabdroid, and he is just a little, fairly primitive robot, but he has a recorder in size, and he asks questions in the voice of a little 8-year-old boy, like really personal questions, like, tell me something you've never told a stranger before. And so I thought I decided to do a piece about this where I would compete against the robot to see who could get the most out of people. And I actually sat down, asked the same questions of the robot, and no follow-up because this is a primitive robot. And I would say we were about even in terms of what we could get out of people. And I think what he's trying to get us to do is we're moving into a world in which there are going to be more and more robots who we are going to communicate. And Sherry Turkle, who's a very famous psychologist at MIT, has done a lot of work where she's done research and found that kids are even talking to Siri on their phone as if it's a person. It doesn't take much. We are cheap dates. We are very cheap dates. So this was one of the pieces I did. I think his work is interesting because it's constantly forcing you to interact with this technology and think about your emotions, why you're feeling this way. So he was one of the artists that intrigued me. Next, this is an artist. She is a data artist by the name of Lori Frick. Lori's data, though, tends to be very, very personal. So this was one of her first pieces. And it is basically data that she got from putting one of these bands on her head and measuring her sleep. And she said when she used to think that she was a solid sleeper, 8-hour a night sleeper, and discovered after doing this, she is not. So what you're seeing in here are various patterns of when she was actually sleeping and when she was awake, when she was in REM sleep, when she was in light sleep. She then managed to get data from other people and discovered that your sleep patterns are almost like a fingerprint. You know, each one is unique. Lastly, I want to quickly get to this. We're running out of time. This was from a data dump she got from OkCupid that she turned into personality profiles and data. I mean, they're essentially profiles that go down, and the colors signify different emotions. Lori has this image of the future in which she imagines that all of our data, our health data, our personality data, our social media data will come together, and it will enable us to know, like, if a certain friend is good for you or a certain friend isn't good for you. You go out with a certain friend, every time you see them, you're depressed and you drink for days. That they may suddenly fall off your calendar, you know. So she has this incredible vision of the future. She does understand the privacy implications, but she's trying to get us to think about why we would want our data. What's so exciting about data on a personal level? And I would say she basically is a portrait artist, but she's doing it with data. And so anyway, those were my examples of, you know, artists and criminals. And I'm looking for more artists and criminals because I want to turn the idea into a book. So thank you.
We have a few sitting here. So Laura, this is a very in-depth question, and I want you to answer it very quickly.
All right.
What are the ways that you're seeing technology changing culture?
Oh my God, in every way. I mean, I can't, you know, we are going through an exponential change in how we relate to each other as human beings. I mean, talk about information, right? How we're getting information. The culture itself, I mean, Neil Stephenson, who wrote Snow Crash, one of the inspirations for that was he kept seeing the various, you know, sort of libertarian techies imagining this future world, which he envisions as being a world of gated communities, affinity groups, you know, and this came out in the 90s, and I think culturally he was right. We are sort of moving in that direction. So I would say there really isn't a facet of life right now that isn't being upended by computers and digital technology.
Thank you. Tom Aageson is the former president and CEO of the Museum of New Mexico Foundation. He has built a market for international folk artists in over 30 countries. He is the author and consummate entrepreneur and mentor to artists, profits, and nonprofits. And Tom co-founded CreativeStartups.org, an accelerator for creative entrepreneurs. Please also note that Tom's book, I hope I'm right, Tom, Creative Economy Entrepreneur Startup to Success, is on sale in the registration area. Is that correct?
It is sort of correct. If you take a picture of it, you can then go to Amazon, because those are our only 2 copies. The rest are on the printer's press.
Okay. So that was our little commercial. So
Thank
Tom?
you. Oh, thanks. One or the other here. So, Meow Wolf. What Tony asked me to do was to talk about new business terms. New business terms. And I'll tell you what I found in talking to people was that a lot of the terms are exactly the same. I've heard many people here say, I talk to the customer. And of course, those terms have always been around. Contracts have always been around. Stages of payment have already been around. But what I looked at on Meow Wolf is their organizational chart, which is, so they have a variety of different teams, from the Fab team to TV, the tech team, and Art Fab Lab. And it goes all the way through to the documentation and learning center, which is very important. To them, education is extremely important. So this is a look at how a company like Meow Wolf that you were acquainted to over lunch, who came out of our accelerator, is organizing itself. There's one piece missing, which is philanthropy. You heard Vince say they have given last year $100,000 to arts groups, and they've done it year in and year. Pardon? That's their total. Is it? Or did it? They gave 500 last year? Good for them. So the impact, economic-based jobs, just a quick definition for those who are unfamiliar with it, is when at least 60% of your sales are coming from outside of your economic system that you live in. And that has a huge multiple of impact on your local economy. It is now the top visitation spot, and they hire into a lot of tech jobs, and it's bringing high salaries into this city, which, quite frankly, this city has been a very service-oriented government economy, and that doesn't mean high salaries. So IDEUM, who presented here this morning, they create all kinds of engagement, educational engagement, primarily in museums. They've done some work, amazing work, in retail and corporations. And what makes them hum is entrepreneurship, innovation, tech and economic-based jobs, that comes up again, which I think most of your businesses do. And they have this global client base. They're based in 40 countries. They've built for primarily museums in those countries, and they're located about an hour south of us. So some of their terms they live with internally would be multi-touch tables, interactive engagement, projection mapping, source codes, and it goes on because, and those are familiar to you, all of you who work in this field. So the terms inside are very similar. The terms outside are very acquainted to to all of you and other business areas. So this is a new business coming online, electric, playhouse. And then some of the new things happening in museums is the technology art curator. The Guggenheim is a particular leader in this. So there are some new aspects coming out. I really encourage you, when you have a chance today, to go to the Toma Foundation art house. It's over off of Canyon Road, which is the famous road full of galleries. But have a look at it. The Toma, Carl, and Marilyn have several curators. So I would suggest you have a look over there. It's a really important addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So Tom, you started to touch upon collectors and museums. And clearly, this work with technology is changing the art world. How does the work fit into the traditional art world of collectors and museums? How do you see this?
Well, those of you who had a chance to go to Bill Miller's house, you saw he has a mix there from Native American work to some interactive work. People are slowly integrating it into their collections. Now, a guy like Carl Toma he just jumped into it because he's very familiar with technology. In fact, he told me once when Apple came out with their first phone, he bought one. He thought the damn thing didn't work, and he shorted on the stock, and he lost his shirt. So, but it's coming, but it does take serious collectors like the Tomas and individuals. You'll see it in some of the houses if you had a chance to get into them here in Santa Fe, that they're integrating it, but it's slow. As you see, most of the examples we saw today are in the experience economy, and they're huge commissions. So, but the individual collector will come along.
Yeah, and who will influence curators that then influence museums and then the museum visitors.
Carl Toma just purchased from the University of New Mexico Frederick Hammersley, who was making art on a computer in 1969 using the old huge IBM computer with cards. And it's really something to see. So there's some history.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the panel each the same question. We've been charged with giving our impressions of what we're learning here and what we've discovered and observed here at the conference. So from each of your perspectives, you're all from different worlds related around the topic of technology and art. From your perspective, what do you identify as the main issues discussed here at the summit? Has anything surprised you, or has anything validated what you've already thought? Eric? Oh, Tom, you have the mic.
Eric pointed to me like I'm responsible.
You have the mic. You've got, yes.
You know, what I really love, and it came up so often, was the sense of collaboration, which is really, I mean, it's so important. It's got to be basic to our education. But I was really impressed by that. And I heard twice this wonderful phrase, "You got the best job." And so there are just a lot of different connections going on here, and what I love to call, I'm sure is going on, business collisions. Has anybody here been involved in a business collision besides me? What is it? It's when one business gets to have coffee with another one and they say, "Hey, we ought to do this together. I've got a client," right? Now, how many have had that conversation? See, that's what this is about too.
I mean, I think, first off, the quality of the work that I've seen has been amazing, and just a lot of bridges. I noticed there were also sort of a lot of bridges and airports where a lot of this art is taking place, which I just thought is interesting. I'm not sure why that is, but I've seen a lot of that. Then there was something that surprised me, which is I didn't hear a lot about issues, like struggles, like especially when you're talking about public art. Public art, you have to deal with communities, and often people don't agree. I was saying earlier, I went to law school, and I was in law school during the whole tilted art debate in New York City, the Sarah sculpture that was downtown in New York, and eventually they had to get rid of it because New Yorkers didn't like it. So I haven't heard much of discussion about those kinds of challenges, and that's been surprising to me. Also things like copyright, because we're living in an era in which replication, not just copying, but replication is totally possible. And I didn't quite get to this in my talk, but I've done some coverage of blockchain and its potential use for digital art. We haven't really seen much internet art here, but that's an area where you're just beginning to see collectors get into it. But then the question is, how do you own it? And so blockchain has been one of the things
and protect it.
Yes, and protected, exactly, from
Intellectual property.
I heard about teams more than anything else, more than individual artists, and that you just can't get this work done by yourself. I mean, just by the very nature of it. It's certainly my practice at Stamen. If only one person is responsible for it, we don't regard it as a functioning work. It needs to have more than one person in it, just kind of baked in. So just to see that reified here, I think part of it has to do with the scale, but also part of the way that things like Burning Man are changing the way that we think about public art. I've started to hear things like, it doesn't matter if it's going to be up for another 100 years, like it can be up for 10 years, and that's still a valid thing to be working on. And then the thing I heard here that if you weren't in it, I wanted to share it with you, is the Meta Lab people said this great thing when they were asked about contracts and how to make things work. The Meta Lab they help artists build large-scale projects, and they said that one of the ways that they were able to be really effective was by leveraging a really kind of messy phrase in the contract that says the site will be prepared for the artist. That may not be the exact word, but it's a clause in the contract that you have with the property owner that says the developer will prepare the site for the artist. And they've used that to just like wring money out of the developers like crazy. It was really, really nice. I mean, I'm saying it a little funny, but they basically were like, but metaphorically, they were basically
words.
like, it doesn't just mean providing a grade, right? It means bringing electricity to it doesn't necessarily, but they're saying that it does. And I thought that was really cool, that I'm starting to see, a non-ironic, just totally normal expression of how to use contracts and the nature of contracts to do amazing artwork. And I feel like that barrier where artists are not afraid to engage with contracts, make money, that's a charming artifact of the past.
Mm-hmm. It's the new entrepreneur. So we know that with all this public art, and we have been, as Laura mentioned, we've been seeing the success stories. And behind that, of course, there are other stories where the work has not yet been seen through to fruition. And there are the challenges that the artists that we've been watching and listening to, they have persisted and they've overcome the challenges and made new inventions in order to get their work out there. So, and we also know that the public is responding in fantastic ways, and that interests me very much, how the public has this innate knowing of how to use most of this art, although we saw one artist that said the young people knew exactly what to do, and then the older people had to be told how to use it. So in thinking about education, Tom, who needs to be educated? Who needs to be informed? And how do we increase understanding? Who is that audience that we need to teach more and advise more?
Well, our kids are native digital, I should say digital natives. Mm-hmm. And however, my experience here is that they know all about Facebook, Instagram, and things of that nature. And that is pretty much it. And so I think that there's a wider world for these kids. And our schools really need to get ready for the 21st century. And what we have all seen this yesterday and today is very much of the 21st century, the very beginning of it. If we meet in 10 years, honestly, this is going to be so different. So I would start with the kids. I mean, I'll tell you something. I am 78. And you don't need to educate me anymore. Don't waste your time. I love this stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't do it. I love it. And I love the entrepreneurship behind it. So let's really invest in our schools everywhere. I heard some examples of that at the Martin Luther King School in, I believe, New York. But there's got to be a lot more. And so when I say Meow Wolf has a learning center and team, that's important. And IDEUM is giving grants into high schools. So what we didn't touch on was your community engagement. And I'd love to hear more of that from you, because that's a piece of education.
I would just say, responding to what you were saying earlier, this idea that Gibson and Stevenson kind of predicted this tribalized situation that we're living in now. And as far as education goes, I mean, the NEA is not coming back, right? And we're not, I mean, and you know, Orange Cheeto Hitler is not going to stop doing what he's doing, right? So, like, and so my point of that is, if we're going to be tribal about all this, if this is really what's happening, if we're entering an age of kind of less community on an overall level and more tribal, then we better take care of our tribe, right? And get very involved and engaged, because the large power structures are not on our side, at least in terms of the arts. And so it might be a bit of a radical thing to say, but it's if we're not going to have, I live in California, and we just had the climate summit, and there's all these mayors, and everybody came together and said, well, if the feds aren't going to stay in the Paris Accords, maybe we need to do it on a local level, right? And so there's this kind of increased education that's less about, and it's unfortunate, but because if we can't have common language, then at the very least, I feel like we need to take care of each other.
Can I have one more thing? I mean, actually, in this issue of technology and education and community, I think it's rather terrible that right now there's the humanities and the arts are being sort of pushed down in the ladder, and I actually think that art and technology will help more people get excited about technology and building technology. You know, I didn't say this, but Steve Jobs' very famous quote, "Part of what made the Macintosh great was that the people working on it were musicians, poets, and artists, zoologists, historians. They also happened to be the best computer scientists in the world." And you know, he always brought these things together, and you know, they still push into the schools. But I feel like artists working with tech need to step forward, because there's, you know, don't just be like, what the kids know how to do is what the corporations are teaching them. They know how to use YouTube or, you know, use an iPhone. But there's so much more. And I just feel like the arts community really can be the bridge.
Yeah, whether it's through music or
Exactly.
dance or visual arts.
Because all of them are being affected by technology.
We need to move from this emphasis on STEM to STEAM.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
STEAM.
STEAM.
Yeah. Thank you to all of you for all your contributions. It was such a pleasure seeing you and being with you. And now we all head back into the main hall for our keynote.